We got to wait a few more days for the full schedule, but we know one game for the Bucks. We'll take a look at the importance of that one and Bobby Portis's comments on a local station coming up after this on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia. You can, of course, hear me throughout the course of the season on the Bucks Radio Network. We are fastly approaching the time for our crew to reconvene. Once again, we're going to know exactly when that is or where that is just 2 days from now when the full schedule gets released. We do know one Bucks game, as that was revealed earlier today on part of the marquee schedule reveal. So we'll take a look at that and what else to expect for the national games for the Bucks coming up a little bit later on today's show. I did want to start, though, with a bit of an update on this week's schedule. As you have noticed, the shows today and yesterday released it a little bit later in the day. A number of reasons behind that. We're also recording later in the day because of said reasons. So just an update for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, the show will probably release around the same time, sometime around noon Central Time. And I am going to be joined by Tony East, who covers the Indiana Pacers. And you can, of course, hear on Locked On Pacers. We have had Tony on the show for some crossover episodes in the past, previewing back-to-back first-round playoff matchups. But Tony's going to join me tomorrow to talk about the team he covers in the Indiana Pacers, and certainly the absence of Miles Turner, what the feeling is in Indiana, what the fan reaction was, and just the expectations for these two teams, the Bucks and the Pacers, because we'll get into the Bucks discussion over national games and how many they're going to have this upcoming season. Indiana shut out on opening night, shut out on Christmas Day as well. And I believe it's the first time since the former LeBron Cavs years in 2018 that a team that reached the NBA Finals isn't playing on Christmas Day. And of course, there's no Tyrese Halliburton, and now the Bucks have Miles Turner, so that's a big reason why. But we'll get Tony's take on the respect that the Pacers are getting there on a national level. Thursday, not quite as late for the release time, but Thursday we are going to have our good friend Ty Windish is going to join me, and we will talk about a list that he and Rohan put together on the Eurostep podcast, ranking the Bucks players in their roster 1 through 15 to get his thoughts on that and some thoughts on schedules. As I said, we know one game. I would assume some more is going to start to trickle out by the time we sit down and record with Ty, but that'll be coming your way Thursday. And then there is going to be a second show on Thursday. That's, I believe, we'll probably do live to get your reaction. Thursday afternoon, the schedule gets released, so we'll go live and take your reactions and thoughts to what the Bucks have in front of them here. When's the first time they're going to be playing the Indiana Pacers? When does Miles Turner return to Indiana? Who's the home opener against? How many national games do the Bucks have? So we'll get into all of that. What's the toughest month and back-to-backs on a live show Thursday afternoon sometime, reacting to the full release of the schedule. And then TBD on whether or not you're getting two shows Thursday and another Friday, or if that live show that we do Thursday is just going to be in place of your show Friday. But it's going to be me today, obviously, me with Tony tomorrow, and then me with Ty on Thursday. I'm hoping Camille is going to be able to join us Thursday afternoon for the live reaction. Maybe Frank, if we can push it off late enough. But it's TBD for the week for Camille for reasons we won't get into. So that's why the schedule and the cadence has been off a little bit, and you're seeing just a lot of me this week, which may be bad news for some of you. But just want to start things to get the scheduling update out of the way here for this week. I know we said a couple of weeks ago we may start to dip back a little bit in terms of the volume of shows that we produce and put out there on a weekly basis until we get into September and start to get ready for training camp. It's still my goal our goal, I should say, to put out 5 shows a week and give you guys a show every single day. We mentioned it a few times. We are the only daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast that is out there. So we're still shooting for that. You may see some weeks that just have 1 or 2 days that Camille and I take off and enjoy some time off here over the course of the summer. Okay, now that all of that is out of the way, let's just touch on what we do know in the first game that was revealed for the Bucks with this schedule release. And by the way, maybe jarring for some to see the league releasing their schedule, or the first portion of it, with the Christmas Day games, which came out last week, but they confirmed it today. And then opening week, basically the first couple of nights of opening night, and their marquee games on the Today Show. Good Morning America and the Today Show, because NBC is once again a partner with the NBA, or of the NBA. So we got the NBC synergy and crossover. And I bring that up because the Bucks are going to be playing one of those Peacock games on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So this kind of came out last week. I forget the source that confirmed it, but that the Memphis Grizzlies would not be playing or hosting a game on MLK Day this year, which was the first in quite a long time. They're playing overseas around that time frame. So you always kind of knew Memphis and Atlanta as the 2 staples for MLK Day for the obvious reasons. And the Bucks are once again going to be featured on that MLK schedule in Atlanta against the Hawks. First game of the day, exclusive to Peacock. So you got a quadruple header. The final 3 games are going to be played on NBC. The first game of the day on January 19th is a Peacock exclusive game, and that is the Bucks in Atlanta taking on the Hawks. Now, I mentioned before, got to be interesting to see how many national games the Bucks have and the rest of that MLK Day schedule. Some interesting matchups. The Oklahoma City Thunder, reigning champions, going to Cleveland to take on the Cavaliers, and a team that won the Central Division last year, led the Eastern Conference in wins. Those were the 2 best teams record-wise a year ago. Certainly have high aspirations to win the Eastern Conference this year. So you got a Thunder versus Cavs matchup as your second game of the day. Tipping off at 4 o'clock at Madison Square Garden, you got the Knicks and the Dallas Mavericks. So Cooper Flagg in the spotlight on MLK Day at Madison Square Garden. And the final game of the night, an interesting one. The Boston Celtics, and you've heard me share my thoughts on what kind of season are the Celtics going to have here, going to Detroit to take on the Pistons. So those are your 4 games on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which again is Monday, January 19th. We learned the Christmas Day games last, Thursday, Friday. That was confirmed earlier today on Good Morning America, but there's only 2 Eastern Conference teams playing on Christmas Day. The Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks, which it feels like the league is really leaning into those 2 teams, because they will also open the season. The Cavs and Knicks. Knicks will host the Cavs on Wednesday night, October 22nd. So it's technically not the season opener. It's the season opener for those 2 teams. The season opener, by the way, is on NBC and Peacock this year. It starts on Tuesday, October 21st, 2 Western Conference games. The Rockets and the Thunder, the Warriors and the Lakers. Wednesday, it moves to ESPN, and Thursday, that is. And that's, again, the Cavs and the Knicks, and then the Spurs and the Dallas Mavericks. And the Pacers on Thursday will host the Oklahoma City Thunder in a rematch of the finals. But I mentioned that's one of the Christmas Day matchups as well, the Knicks and Cavs. Get used to a lot of Knicks and Cavs and leaning into those 2 teams. Certainly the appeal of the television market that is New York, the success the Cavaliers found last season, and a lot of ambiguity and questions surrounding the Eastern Conference. This is the first time where we've had multiple games on Christmas Day, and at least 80% of those games are made up by one conference only. You got to go all the way back to, I forget the year, but it was the Bulls versus the Pistons. And that was the only game on Christmas Day. It's the last time you had one conference have as much exposure as the Western Conference is going to have on Christmas Day this year. So Cavs Knicks is it. It's the only Eastern Conference flavor we're going to get on Christmas Day. That's the first game of the day. Then you get Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs taking on the Thunder at 1:30. The Mavs and the Warriors at 4 o'clock. Klay Thompson returning to the Bay. Cooper Flagg as a rookie in his first Christmas Day game. 7 o'clock sees the Rockets and the Lakers in your final game of the night. Maybe the juiciest, the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets. So that's what we know so far. The Christmas Day games, the MLK games, and then opening week. So just one game for the Milwaukee Bucks on that slate. They had 17 nationally televised games a season ago. So what do we think is going to happen with the volume of national games that the Bucks have this upcoming season? We'll get into that conversation coming up after this. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories and not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. They make getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. If you've grown tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, use Game Time Zone Deals Pick. It helps you find the best seats in your section for you. If you're new to the venue, you can get a panoramic seat view, so there's no surprises when the curtains come up. And with Game Time, the price you see is the price you pay, no hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you as well to Game Time, our show sponsor for today's episode of Locked On Bucks. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. 17, I believe, was the number last year that the Bucks had for national games. Again, we'll learn this Thursday afternoon. I would anticipate that number to come down. I think there's going to be a lot of Knicks games. There's going to be a lot of Cavs games. There's going to be more Magic games than we've seen in seasons past. I think teams, Pistons, are going to have more games on a national scale than they did a season ago. I think teams like the Bucks, like the Philadelphia 76ers, are going to have fewer games than they've had in the past because there's probably just a great deal of boredom with this team. We've had many discussions throughout this offseason already of who's the second best player on this team, who's the number 2 scoring option. The casual fan is looking at the same thing and saying, I don't know. I know they have Giannis. I don't know who the rest of this team is. And I think for that reason, there's not a whole lot of interest in this Bucks team this season. And that's perfectly fine. We've talked before about, I hesitate to bring it up because I know the feelings, but Doc Rivers teams have really thrived in these roles in the past. You think back to his first couple of years as a head coach with the Orlando Magic. You think back to some of Doc's biggest victories too, where he's taken undermanned teams and gotten the most out of them to beat team like a year ago when the Bucks had that win against the Clippers with basically no one available. There've been a handful of those types of moments throughout Doc's career. We've seen 2 of those with the Bucks, but it's been a staple for Doc Rivers, the coach. And that's one thing to lean into this season. We've talked about obviously leaning into Giannis and everything running through Giannis. The other guys taking a step forward for this Bucks team this upcoming season as well. But being the underdog and embracing that role is going to be a big, big piece for the Bucks this season. Celtics probably going to drop off a little bit with their national scale of games. But I think the Celtics are still going to have more national games than the Bucks will. It's a much larger market. Still have other, known, I suppose, players that you can point to. So I do think we're going to see that number drop for the Bucks. When you talk about, teams like the Magic, teams like the Knicks getting more. They always have a ton, but the Knicks getting more, the Pistons getting more, the Hawks will probably have some more as well. Well, that's got to be made up from somewhere. Maybe we'll see some from the Charlotte Hornets if people want to see Canepo, right? So you got to make it up somewhere. And I think it's going to be teams like the Bucks, like the Philadelphia 76ers, probably that are feeling the brunt of that. So I expect that number of national games to be less than it was a season ago. Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'll know this Thursday afternoon if that's true and how many of these games the Bucks are going to have on a national level. But I think the big thing is it's perfectly fine for teams, for people to not believe in this Bucks team, to sleep on this Bucks team, to not pay attention to this Bucks team. It is perfectly fine. And sometimes it's much better to fly under the radar and let somebody else deal with the expectations and the heightened pressure that came with this team. I'm not saying that's why they didn't reach the heights that you hoped to see the last few years, but think about the feeling those 2 seasons, the expectations and what you were hoping to see that just never came to fruition. I'm fine with this team being the underdog role and starting to slowly build something and achieve things along the way and surprise. So that is my outlook. That is my expectation for when the full schedule gets released. But I think top of mind is not only how many of these national games are the Bucks going to have, who are they against, how many of them are going to be at home is the other thing. Maybe you'll have national games where it's the Bucks in New York to take on the Knicks, the Bucks in Cleveland to take on the Cavaliers. If Damian Lillard were healthy, it's going to be interesting to have the Bucks in Portland to take on the Blazers and vice versa with Dame coming back to Milwaukee in 2026, potentially 2027, depending on how that schedule shakes out for the following season. And of course, the big one is any time you get those 4 games against the Indiana Pacers, and specifically the first game in Indiana for Miles Turner's return to Indy, taking on his former team. But leave your thoughts. How many nationally televised games, I believe it was 17 a year ago, do you think the Bucks are going to have this season? I would put the over-under on 13.5 for this team. I think it's going to drop by about 3 to 4 games this season. So leave your thoughts if you think it's going to be more or less on this schedule that we'll know 2 days from now. I mentioned we did get a current member of the Bucks sharing his thoughts on this team just yesterday. So what Bobby Portis had to say and one other takeaway from BP's appearance on a local show here. We'll get into that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. All right. So Bobby Portis was on the KBN show on ESPN Milwaukee. And full disclosure, ESPN Milwaukee is owned by Good Karma Brands. I am technically a Good Karma Brands employee, so we'll get that out of the way. But he appeared on the afternoon show KBN and was there to promote a pop-up event that he had going on for his Underdog apparel line a little bit later in the night and talk a little bit about the offseason as well. I know we all kind of had this assumption that Bobby Portis was ticketed to stay here when we talk about the reaction that he's received by the fan base in Milwaukee. I know Eric Name in his Q&A that he had with John Horst kind of said the same well, everybody assumed Bobby Portis was going to stay in Milwaukee and be here. And even John Horst joked around, well, I'm glad you felt that way because we certainly weren't quite as confident. It was getting a little nervous for us. I don't think I've shared this, but so the week leading into free agency, so free agency beginning officially that Monday, I believe that was the 1st of July. Now I scrambled it. So the 6th of July was the official beginning. Monday, June 30th was when you could start to have those conversations. So I was told, looking at a calendar here, which makes for great radio, Friday, June 27th, I got a call from a former colleague of mine telling me, hey, I have some information that's probably going to be pertinent to you. There is going to be a press conference today at Fiserv Forum for an event that's going on there. And then afterwards, there's going to be a second press conference. An announcement is going to be made by Bobby Portis, which prompted you to think, well, this is 2-3 days before we can start to hear any type of communication and reporting and free agency. If he is there to make an announcement, I would assume there's one thing you would be announcing. I immediately went into scramble mode and reached out to a few contacts that I have with the organization to see, hey, can you tell me anything about this? And was immediately stonewalled. I reached out to one of our local reporters here to see, what have you heard? And we both kind of kicked around to see, is there any validity to this? And neither of us could obtain anything. I was then told, hey, actually the press conference is canceled. Never mind, false alarm, sorry. So it got you to wondering, was this the plan all along? And it made you a little more interested in that free agency process for Bobby Portis, to think something happened here. Is Bobby Portis going to be back in Milwaukee? Is he not going to be back? And then it was 2 days later that we get the messaging coming through that the Bucks are re-signing Bobby Portis. So it was an interesting start to free agency already over a month ago. But the one thing that I go back to was, Bobby Portis has been around in Milwaukee this whole time. And sure, he's traveled throughout the summer, but he still makes this his home. And even that, that appearance that he made yesterday, it's Bobby Portis in Milwaukee, right? That's the one thing to really sit back and take in, that we have Giannis, who obviously travels to Greece and everywhere else where his he's pulled to, right, with everything that he has going on. But Giannis has made Milwaukee his home. Giannis is a part of the community. I'm sure we all either have these experiences or know someone that has these experiences where you run in to Giannis. Not that you're like, hey, Giannis, how's it going? But you cross paths with him somewhere out in the community. When I had my friend Bart on, Winkler, he was talking about, our kids are in the same, I think, swim class, that we see him, he's here. And this is the one thing I've tried to explain to a lot of national people, in that I look, it's not the rube in me talking, that I just don't think you guys understand this, that there is a, I guess, peace of mind, the way that I would put it, that comes with being in this community that he's not going to get elsewhere. That's not going to be accessible to him in New York or Los Angeles or Toronto, even. That there's this understanding and this mindset that Giannis can just live his life and he's left alone. Sure, you got people that are going to take pictures of him and occasionally come up and ask, like, can I get a picture? Can I get an autograph? But he's largely left alone. And I mean, you go back to the video of Giannis at the State Fair and the pictures of that after they had won the championship, where it's people just kind of gawking at, hey, there's Giannis, but letting him be with his family. And I think we've seen that with Bobby Portis too, to round that point together, and that Bobby's made Milwaukee his home. And he's embraced the city. And that's the one thing to really not take for granted, is there were, decades. And I just saw something on the Road Tripping podcast too, where they were talking about the best and worst cities in the NBA, where what's the list of cities that you always circle to? I can't wait until we're there. And what are the cities that you circle and say, man, we got to go here in February. We got to go here to start the season. And I just dreaded, like, well, we know Milwaukee, Utah, Cleveland, like, these are going to be the places that were mentioned. And surprisingly, it did come up. But for so long, that was the stigma. There's nothing to do here. It's a boring city. Nobody likes being here. The facilities were trash, frankly. And just about all that has changed for the last 10, 15 years with this organization. And to see things like that, like people and players making this their home year round, where Bobby Portis not only lives here, has brought his family here, is one thing to really not take for granted. Bobby Portis, in that interview on KBN, which you can find on the ESPN Milwaukee YouTube page and on their podcasts as well, if you just search for the show, he gave a lot of what you would expect, of optimism for this team and the belief that, hey, we can get back there. Like, when asked what has to happen, or how close are you guys to being at that level again, to competing for a championship, I would expect no other answer than what we got from Bobby Portis, and that we believe we're there. We believe that, we are close enough that we can make that type of leap. But I think the biggest thing that came from that everybody is going to point to and take is, one thing that if we're going to amplify the reporting, and I've shared my thoughts, Camille has, I'm sure Frank has, you've heard it on other shows too. The reporting that's done by, I'm not even going to name names. It's just done by networks pertaining to the future of Giannis. Again, I don't think these reporters are making things up, but I don't think these reports are coming from Giannis himself. If we're going to give as much breadth to that as we are, we need to pay just as much attention to things like Bobby Portis saying repeatedly, as I struggle for words there, Giannis bleeds green. He said it in that interview yesterday. He talked about it throughout the offseason. He mentioned it elsewhere when he was on with, I believe, the FanDuel show with Chandler Parsons and Michelle Beadle, basically saying the same thing of like, Giannis is a loyal guy and he bleeds green and we believe he's going to be here. If his teammate is saying that, it carries just as much water or weight as, some of the other reporting that's going on. I think things like this are important. I don't think it is the take this as gospel and this means that Giannis has told Bobby Portis he is never leaving Milwaukee. But I do think it's important to amplify that. And again, I'm going to keep going back to this one. I think it's incredibly important to keep amplifying what happened the first week of July and the end of June. And I suppose more so the last 2 years, because it drives me crazy that we are going to kind of weave ourselves into this pretzel on a national level to try and wish cast Giannis or to project this doom and gloom and like, well, he's still thinking about these things. And even the vague reporting, we're all keeping all options open, right? In our everyday life for everything. So yeah, I would expect no less. But if we're going to make a point to bring all of these things up, I have not heard this mentioned by anyone else other than Camille and I on this show and a few others that cover the team specifically, the Bucks. But we need to pay attention to the Damian Lillard exit for good reasons for Bucks fans, because that's the cautionary tale for Giannis and the fact that he witnessed this firsthand. Whether or not it's, well, I don't think he wants to be the bad guy. I don't think he wants to wear the black hat and ask for a trade. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know. Again, nobody has that insight to Giannis, at least not the people that are reporting these things. But for this to happen up close and personal, for one of his teammates to experience that 2-year run, that was quite frankly disappointing. And it's not to put it at the feet of Damian Lillard. There was more that went into it than that. But it was disappointing. It wasn't what your aspirations for. You did not reach your expectations for those 2 seasons. And since the exit, we can talk about whether or not it was the right move to stretch that money for Damian Lillard and how much are the Bucks going to be paying long-term. If it keeps Giannis here, whatever the dollar figure is, it's worth it. But for Giannis to see that up front and to see this didn't work. This was supposed to work on paper. This was supposed to be a great fit. Now, was this like, hey, the Bucks are clearly the best team? No, that certainly wasn't the case going into last season. I think we all thought that 2 years ago. But when the Celtics made some moves, and specifically the Drew Holiday trade, there was a lot of Celtics and Bucks right there at that level. And a lot of people picking the Celtics over the Bucks, and rightfully so, as we saw they won the championship. So it wasn't the super team that many have started to craft through their fantasy deals this offseason. But it was close. This team was supposed to be competing for a championship. This team was supposed to be a lock for the conference finals with those 2 guys. And it didn't work. And one by one, you look at some of the other situations that have been wish casted out there. Just go play with Wemby, go to San Antonio and ask for a trade there. Maybe extending De'Aaron Fox means that this is something, they got the matching salary now for Giannis, and the Bucks are going to need a point guard because Damian Lillard's gone. I've shared my thoughts on cap structure, and I don't think you're going to see many of those super teams, if any, anymore, building teams that way to say we're bringing on multiple max level contracts. It didn't work with this team. It hasn't worked with a lot of teams. It didn't work with the Brooklyn Nets. It didn't work with the 76ers last year. And I think that way has gone the way of the dinosaur. And you have to, almost like taking a page from the NFL's book, where the best teams were typically the ones that were getting solid play from a quarterback on a rookie scale contract. Like, you need the fun max guys to lean into that, like how the Thunder were built last year, where it was just your second extension that you were assigning. But once you get into that $55 to $60 million and you're accumulating multiple of those players, it makes it difficult to round out the roster. And it shortens your window even more so. Giannis is a smart guy. I think he's aware of that. The other big thing, does Giannis really want to go somewhere where it's 1A and 1B? Like, he has an ego. I don't mean that as a bad thing. We all have ego. But I think there's those two things. And then again, just seeing this should have worked. You had Dame's ability to stretch the floor. You had Giannis as the interior guy. You had Giannis's defense. Those two had long joked about playing together and who would they ideally like to be paired up with, and they got it, and it didn't work. And leaving that situation, Giannis is untouchable, as he should be. He's the greatest player in the history of the Bucks franchise for the work that he has done and everything he's accomplished while wearing a Bucks uniform. Giannis got none of the blame. And this isn't me, dishing out blame and saying, well, who deserves more? But it's more of, let's just take a step back and look at how's this going to be received. It wasn't Giannis's fault. It was Damian Lillard's part, largely by the fan base. And I get why. But let's apply that to Giannis. And he got a chance to see that firsthand, to say, look, it's a much different landscape in the league where super teams aren't a guaranteed success route anymore. And I go somewhere, it doesn't work. I don't see it happening for a number of reasons. But let's say there's a trade to San Antonio. Doesn't work out. It's not Victor Wembanyama's fault in the eyes of Spurs fans. It's the guy that we traded for to bring in that didn't fit. And now what do we do? So I just wish that would get more attention for all of the talk of Giannis needs to leave. Where should Giannis go next? We literally did the same thing with Damian Lillard 3-4 years ago. It's time for Dame to leave, and you're kind of constantly waiting. When is Damian Lillard going to ask for a trade? He finally does. He ends up in Milwaukee. It doesn't work out. And we just kind of forget about all that. And then we hear Damian Lillard even acknowledge and say, look, I never really wanted to leave here. I shouldn't have left here. And when the hope to go to Miami fizzled out, I should have communicated more with Joe Cronin and kind of said, look, I don't want to be traded. I want to stay here. I just wish you'd hear more of that coming up too, of like, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Same with the dynasty talk of, let's not automatically crown the Thunder to win the next 5 championships because of the second apron and giving out extensions and what that's going to do for you. We're sure you're deep now, but when it's just, okay, all we have is minimums that we can give out, it certainly starts to change things. We saw that in Milwaukee. Let's have that same conversation about trade requests and how it hasn't worked out for a number of guys in the past. It worked out for Drew Holiday twice, right? But it wasn't Drew Holiday requesting a trade. So this wish casting of stars and getting them to move on, it's not as clean as we make it out to be. And I just wish we would hear someone outside of Milwaukee apply that filter and logic and say, well, let's hold on here. Let's look at Damian Lillard's experience and just how comparable he and Giannis are for their standings in franchise history, the type of guy they were with one organization, type of player that they were, all of that. There's a lot of similarities here. It didn't work out. And we heard Dame say, you know what? I probably should have never left. Maybe we should start to have that similar discussion with Giannis. That is my one hope. I know it's not going to come, but that's my hope for the rest of this discourse throughout the course of this offseason. And we know it's not going away next summer either. All right. A lot to get to this week. It's going to be fluid in terms of your hosts for the week. I'm going to be here all week. We hope to get Camille back at some point this week, but we know Tony East on tomorrow's show to talk about the Pacers, to talk about Miles Turner, what we need to know about him, what the reaction was in Indiana. I talked with Tony the day of the signing and tried to pick his brain on what were some of the offers that Miles Turner got, and got some very interesting intel from him there. So we'll get Tony East's thoughts on Miles Turner, what he means for the Bucks, where the Pacers go from here. Ty Windish is going to be with me on Thursday, and we'll take a look at his list, ranking 1 through 15, this Bucks roster, what we know so far about the schedule as well. And then Thursday, late afternoon, after the schedule is revealed, there will be a live show coming your way to just take a look and react to what we've seen from the schedule release and whether or not there's more or less, you name it, the national games, all games on the schedule that stand out for the Bucks. I will be there to do that live. I'm hoping Camille will be able to join me as well. And then we may have a show after that on Friday. TBD, touch and go on that one to see what else develops throughout the course of Thursday afternoon. Thanks again to today's show sponsor, our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NBA. Thanks as always for making this your first listen of the day. For your second listen, we encourage you to check out the Locked On NBA podcast, where there is no off season. You got Doug, Matt, and Hayes keeping you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, everything you need to know to be the most informed NBA fan. You can find Locked On NBA on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Leave your thoughts, predictions for this Bucks schedule that we'll know 2 days from now, and then look forward to a couple of interviews coming up on tomorrow and Thursday's show. Thanks again to everybody for tuning in, for downloading the show, for viewing us on YouTube. It helps us immensely. Tell a friend. We are the only daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast all throughout the season, every single day, Monday through Friday. Give us a like and subscribe as well. It certainly helps our cause. That will do it for today's show. Back again tomorrow with Tony East to talk about Miles Turner and the Indiana Pacers. Thanks for tuning in to Locked On Bucks.